gosh.
Oh, your house? Only at Don's house. Welcome, everyone, back to the Bible Recap discussion. We are in week 13 of our study here, and we are looking at finishing book of Joshua. And so that's chapters 12 to 24, and getting into the book of Judges, going to the first 7 chapters. And Dawn just said she was going to lead off, and that she's the boss of her house, and we're going to have to let her be the boss today.
Okay, question number 1. Did you learn anything new about the location or layout of Israel through our study of tribal allotments this week? If so, what was it?
For me personally, it was just the different landscapes throughout of it,
And it sounded beautiful.
Yeah.
I don't know if it is,
Yeah.
but it sounded beautiful.
Some parts, very much so.
Well, and it's crazy. This book I would say reading, but it's really listening to. They go through Israel, and it was funny because reading this at the same time as listening to that, they're talking about how you could be on the beach and then drive like 9 hours and be skiing. And that it kind of it was just funny how those actually this same series twice in the readings this week, which I'll get into a little bit later, but that was more of it than anything. And when you think of the Middle East or Israel, you think deserts. You don't think of fertile ground, mountains and hills and pastures, and so you kind of get to that point of just that's what you see and think. And you kind of think of just Jerusalem almost, a dry climate, and where it's a lot different than. And it seems like it's a very big area that we're not, we think of Israel as like this big on the map, but it's a lot bigger than what you think.
Yeah. And I liked how she referenced some of the areas, that was allotted to them. That was also, where modern day countries were. So we, when we think of Israel, it's like, oh, there's kind of the same place. Well, actually it encompassed a larger area than what we typically think.
Yeah.
What you think, lady?
I just had written down that it sounded beautiful, and then I needed a map, and then I realized I have a map in the back of my Bible, so I'm looking at it now, and it's starting to make a little more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely some areas are larger than others. So,
yeah,
I don't know if that...
Well, some of it was, and correct me if I'm wrong, but depending on how big the tribe was, they got more area, correct?
Yeah.
Like Judah was the largest tribe, and they got the most amount of land.
Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah, I think for me too, I appreciate the diversity of the landscape and the fact that it can be just as different in different parts of Israel like it is for us here in the United States, where you could be on the beach, and drive a few hours this way, be up in the mountains with the snow, drive over this way, and then you're in the desert.
Yeah, California, pretty much.
Well, and I think even with some smaller spaces in our country, think of Colorado. Typically we think Rocky Mountains, snow, but I've driven through parts of Colorado. It's I don't see any snow.
Yeah. Pablo.
Yes. It's dry and desert-like. Yeah. So. Got anything to add with your map?
No, I'm just looking.
Okay. Yeah. Question number 2. In the dispute over the altar at the border, the Western tribes and the Transjordan tribes each have their own perspective on what the altar means. They are able to resolve the misunderstanding and keep the peace through reasoning and humility. Can you think of a time when you misunderstood someone else's motives or wrongly accused them? Yes.
Yeah, I was I know I've done it, but I can't think of
I couldn't think of an example, but I'm sure I've done it as well.
Well,
just think back to the last fight with your spouse.
Yeah, it's usually I'm wrong, and I'm just not wanting to let it go.
So that should have been an issue.
Queen Dawn. Queen Dawn.
So remember, she is the boss of her house.
At my house.
definitely felt that way before, but it's nothing that I had to like could think of a direct example. But I think it comes down to, and I've heard this, it's kind of just human nature. You go with what your first thought is and you expect that to be right. You know, it's not, you know, you may take offense to it, but you're not thinking of what the other people are, you know, thinking, I guess. So
I think it's, you know, where we listen to respond, not to understand. And so I don't know, just especially when it comes down to some of the stuff going on in the United Methodist Church, even some of my clergy friends we were just talking past each other because we didn't even have the same vocabulary to be able to adequately engage. And so, you know, when there's misunderstanding, then of course, then you start to assume something about people's motives, and, or even, you know, the interpretation of what they're trying to say instead of pausing, take a step back and ask clarifying questions. The active listening part, you know, you're supposed to, you know, say back to what you heard so that, you know, then they can say, that's what I said, or no, that's not what I said. And they can try again.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
Queen.
I don't know why I wrote down page 192, and then I don't know. I should have reviewed. I apologize.
You're okay.
It's all right.
You're okay. There might be something there that.
I don't know. What I have the structure is a monument to show the relationship between them and the Western tribes connecting them. They were afraid that in the future the Western tribes would disown them and their kids. So they wanted something to serve as a sign. I think I was answering the first part in the dispute over the altar. On what the altar means,
Yeah.
So they weren't really rebelling against God.
Nope.
Yeah. It's
So
good
it
to
does
ask,
kind
you
of
know,
go back
what
to
are you
that
doing?
misunderstanding of,
Yeah. Then
And
I
I'm
think,
sure I have done that a lot.
yeah, I usually try to keep it to myself first. But I think this is a good example for us as people to work with other people. You know, we have to, you know, put ourselves in their shoes before we react. You know, we may be right in what they're meaning and be able to take offense to it, but not going straight to an offense, be offensive, offended by it. That's what I should say. We should, you know, take a step back, look at it from their side, and then just ask them in a nice, polite way versus holding it inside or attacking, you know. So making sure, you know, that active listening, like you said, like making sure what is being done is what we think it is, not before we act. So.
Yeah, and that's, I think, with the power of questions. I always remember a couple of professors during my doctorate, or my the preaching professor said, try to be interested in what you're saying. Don't try to be interesting. Because if you try to be interesting, then of course you can be, you know, disingenuous and whatnot. But if you stay interested in what you're doing, then people can catch your genuine excitement. Another professor, just the power of just questions. You know, what's going on. So, for example, when we were at one of the South Korean churches, there was one of the pictures of the typical white Jesus that's pretty popular, and so. So sometimes, of course, you know, in debates when it comes to, you know, the image of Jesus, you know, oh, he was a Jewish brown man, you know, but he just went over and goes, so, you know, what's the story behind the painting? And it was a gift to that church from another church, I think, in Europe.
Wow.
And so, you know, instead of just presuming that they think Jesus is a white, and, you know, it was a gift just from one church to another. So it's just, you know, the power of questions, just, and then you get to hear a story, and also then see other relationships. So it was pretty cool.
That is cool. All right, are we ready for 3?
Yes, sir.
All right. Read Judges 2, chapter 10 aloud.
And do you have that out?
I think I'm pretty close if I do.
So I have it if
If I can not pick every single page when I try to turn. All right. Judges chapter 2, verse 10. After the whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, and another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. One of Israel's problems is that they failed to teach their children the truth about God. As the older generations died off, the younger generation is lured in by the ways of the Canaanites. Think of a time when you forgot the truth about God and your heart was lured in by the world. What lies were you believing about God that led you astray? I never felt like I was led astray from God. I think it was more, not by the world anyways, I guess. It was more of my values did not match up to, well, the Catholic Church's. There's a few things in there that I just didn't quite understand, and it never made sense to me. So it kind of, I estranged myself from the church, but then at the same time, I think I was doing it from God, not necessarily because I was going away from the church. I was less focused in my life on God, if that makes sense. So, but I don't really think I was ever like lured away by the world, if that makes sense. Like it was almost more of myself, I guess. So, but that's about, all I got.
I think our society and our culture is very easily can lead us astray just by, bad things happen. And so it's kind of hard to, still remain steadfast and faithful to God when bad things happen. And so you start questioning, well, is he really here? So not necessarily do I feel, again, astray from him, but I think your faith can kind of tend to weaken a little bit, or just, I can still remember we had a Bible study. It's been many, many years ago, but there was a baby that had been delivered and was sick, and it was a part of our church group. And, we had one couple that was just like, how can you believe in a God that would allow something like this to happen? That child did nothing. And so you start going, well, I don't know. Why would he let something like that happen? Yeah. And then you feel shameful that you're even questioning that because it isn't his. But yet we are also taught that our God can do anything and can fix anything and can correct anything. So you do start to, I don't know, second guess that a little bit. But I think I'll go back to, did anybody watch CBS Sunday Morning? I know you don't because it's during your preaching time. But they always have some very interesting interviews. And Henry Kissinger, I thought he was dead, is still alive and getting ready to celebrate 100. And something he said, Ted Koppel was interviewing him, but they kind of got into the Vietnam War and all the wars that Henry was a part of, being Secretary of State and all that stuff. But anyway, the younger generation, a generation that doesn't even know Henry Kissinger, was basically being very critical of him for his actions many years ago. And so Ted Koppel was asking him about that. Well, first he said to him, he goes, I thought we were here because I'm celebrating a 100-year birthday and not, the controversy of decisions that we made in the past. But the comment he made, and it sticks with me, is he said our younger generation is emotional and they don't think. They just run with their emotions and they don't think about the hard decisions that have to be made because they can't see that. And I think that kind of refers to almost this question a little bit, because when we get our emotions involved, we don't think about the hard truths that God is still there. We shouldn't have, gone astray. No. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, but it was just, anyway, so interesting. I'm not trying to downplay the younger generation, but you watch our society and our culture today, what do? Everything is based on how it makes us feel. And in the moment.
Yep.
And we're not using our brain and common sense sometimes to work through that to see why somebody is reacting the way they are or not. But anyway, I thought it was very, very interesting.
Millennials and Gen Z, we're not a well-differentiated
Yeah.
group of people. So, what came to mind for me in this question was no, you're good. You're good.
No, that
it was
was
good. Was Huey Lewis in the News? It's hip to be square.
Yeah.
Because my college experience, going to church and being a Christian, I mean that it was viewed as restricting and ruining your fun and so I think part of that being lured into the world and start believing in lies. And Jackie Hill Perry on Tim Ross's podcast put it well. Says that I'm not going to be able to quote her, but to the effect what she was saying is that holiness is actually freeing. So we got to be careful that we don't buy into the lie that holiness is somehow restricting us, when it's actually showing us a freer way to live, that we're not ruled by our passions. Because if the heart is deceitful above all things, then we have to, and I think that's why, Paul says in Romans chapter 12, with the renewing of our minds, because there's good, if the heart can just, go off and, want to do selfish things, then there's got to be, God working on us can help, bring that back so that it can be transformed completely. The song "Hip to Be Square" went through my mind.
Love it. I love it.
Because the song, I used to be a renegade.
Yeah.
I used to fool around. Sorry, Huey Lewis was one of my favorite bands, but anyways, so. But you watch Back to the Future, you couldn't help it, enjoy it.
I know.
So,
I
let's see.
understand. Number 4. God repeatedly warned the Israelites about what would happen if they didn't drive out the Canaanites. As he begins fulfilling that promise, they fall into a cycle of repentance and rebellion. Why is it so hard to obey God even when we know the outcome of disobedience will be disastrous?
I just went with, I wrote something short here. Just human nature is selfish and lazy. I think it had a lot to do with those two items on why a lot of them didn't do it. Like we have our plenty of room over here. I really don't want to mess with them. Mm-hmm. They're fine there, rather than listening to what God says to drive them out. I think that's part of it, but just the laziness of not wanting to do it, or, some of us, if something's hard, we put it off until the very last possible thing. And, running someone out of their home is probably pretty hard to do. Mm-hmm. So I think, just the not doing it was more of themselves and just not wanting to do it versus, no, I guess they did disobey God on that point, but that was more of it than anything. So
I agree. I'd put they don't recognize their insecurities, which we still don't, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I reference again, the heart is deceitful above all things. And sometimes, what we're thinking or feeling, sometimes just throw us off. And because we're like, well, that makes sense to us, even though it could be a complete lie and fabrication. But also think about Paul, where even Paul talks about his own struggle. I don't do the things I want to do, but I do the things I also don't want to do. Mm-hmm. And so I think, while we're still in our fallen bodies, we still have that struggle with the nature of the flesh and the temptation to sin. Why is it so hard? I think, it's just so easy just to get comfortable and let our guard down and lose the intentionality. I mean, just like any other skill that we have as people, if you don't practice that skill, you're going to be very rough, or you're going to lose, what you had. So that's where in our faith, there's really no static. It's just either you're growing or you're declining.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Number 5. Deborah the prophetess is the only judge in Israel who fully honors God and the one who follows his commands most closely. given her heart to follow him, why isn't she the one appointed to lead Israel into battle? What traits of a good leader are demonstrated in her relationship with Barak?
I just went with God appointed Barak to lead the army. She was more of like what we see as judges today, as in judging the law, and then Barak was the military leader. And what I see as a good leader in her, like something I would take is just being able to take from God what she was supposed to do and not second guessing it and making what's best for her and her people. And taking that time to do that. And I think it was pretty cool that he refused to go into battle without her. And then she said a woman would get credit for this, and most people were probably thinking she's meaning her, but it's really the person and the wife of I can't remember the guy in the tent that used the tent post to go through his temple. So
he had a splitting headache after that encounter. Sorry,
that is true.
but anyways,
no, that was a story I'm sure I've heard before, but never really in depthly studied. So it was pretty cool to see. So yeah.
The other thing I think I would add is, from a woman's perspective, I think she felt God was really appointing Barak to do that. I mean, that she had a position, and she was bold, and she was level-headed, and she was keeping her word with God. But I guess I just felt like she wasn't asked to lead them into battle. But
Yeah,
I may be
God chose.
totally wrong.
Yeah.
But
and
yeah.
I mean, she was a prophetess, it says, and of course, our role was, say, this is the role, this is your task, and of course, Barak kind of just, will you please hold my hand?
Yeah.
It's like, yes, I'll hold your hand, but you're not going to get the credit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, to the traits of a good leader, a good leader does also support. I mean, even though Barak was supposed to be unleashed and go and lead the army, she was a good leader in a sense that she would support him in what he needed to do, but didn't do it for him.
Yeah.
Because I think that would have been a case of disobedience then if she would just said, move to the side and did it for him when God said, nope, he needs to lead the troops in the battle.
Yeah. It's a really cool story that like I said, I'm sure I've heard, but actually studying it, you have a lot more respect. All right. I think we're ready for number 6.
Yes, sir.
So
You
we're
get to read Judges again.
All right. So read Judges chapter 6, 12 and 13. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all of this happened to us? Where are all of his wonders that his ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the land of the Midian." Have you ever felt like this? Have you ever questioned God's presence or work in your life when things aren't going as you hoped? What did you learn through that experience? What does Gideon learn through his experience? You always we have ups and downs as everything, and it's always in our downs that we feel like God has left us here, when I think we've talked about this several times, but usually when I have these biggest issues, or when death, like when something bad happens to me, I don't look at it, but I see, like my great grandpa passed away, like I was, why God, why, questioning what his needs were. But now I see he was doing it for the benefited my grandpa to go to heaven and be with him. But I think what I learned from that is there's a lesson in everything, in growth, even on your downs, but we still need to just trust and go from there. So, but I think Gideon learned that as well, honestly, that, God can raise you from the lows to the highs, but we just need to be obedient to what his word is.
Learn to trust, I think.
So, yeah.
My answers were similar. I mean,
Yeah.
Death of parents, you feel abandoned, but you're not.
Yeah.
And then all the good things that have happened since, you just go, okay. I mean, he could see the big picture. I couldn't.
Yeah.
So, trust.
Yes.
Yeah. God sees it all where we got our blinders on. So, yeah.
I think I shared my last time was, I was bullied and I'd get mad and punt the basketball and hurt my foot and shake my So refer to a previous episode for that story.
Yeah.
I think just learning that, we refer to Romans, all things work out for good for those who love God. Not that God wants us to go through, God doesn't want us to suffer, but he can use that to magnify him and what he's doing and what he can do with that. That the fact that even with for Gideon, too many soldiers. Starting with this massive army down to 300 guys, and like, what are we gonna do with this? I mean, we're not SEAL Team 6.
Yeah, he's not Leonidas.
But God uses this just to show off that he plants the dream and then routes. Gideon shows up after the fact, and then the army is routed. The fact that God had made a way when it seemed like there was no way. And so for us, when we encounter these things, I think for us, we see there's no way. All we see is the mountain or the wall, and God, just like with Jericho, just circle it. Let me do my thing, and then you're going to go through.
Yeah.
So, and unfortunately, sometimes for us, we want the McDonald's response where we get it in a minute and a half. It's like, no, it's going to be more like Abraham. You have to wait 25 years before you get which I promised you.
But, and I think that's a lot of God's lessons though too, is just trying to teach us patience. And it's a virtue for a reason. So, I don't
it's
live
a fruit
in
of the spirit as well.
Yeah. That's something I need to work on. I don't have quite the patience I should, but depends on what it is, I guess.
I don't know if it's your age too.
Yeah.
I mean, it truly is. I mean,
Ashley's just poking at you because you're young.
Yeah.
I tell my children all the time, I have evolved.
Yeah.
I've gotten a little better. They just look at me. It does get easier as you get older.
Sounds good.
I don't know what it is, but you just kind of like, I mean, I can tell even just in some of the answers, I mean, we've got 30 years between us.
Yeah.
I was there, and I mean, I understand, and I feel your pain, and I just think you'll be all right, because not that you change your mind, it just those things aren't quite as
important, or
I think it shouldn't even say important, but you just deal with them differently. You just go, okay,
I think in part you develop resilience.
Yeah.
Which is what these young whippersnappers, lacking in their living off of their emotions, right?
Wow. Henry. So cute. All right, number 7. Gideon is trepidatious about following God's lead and asks for repeated confirmation. Is this the same thing as testing God? Why or why not?
I flip-flopped on both sides, but I think I finally came down to, I don't think he's testing God. I think he has more doubt in himself.
That's exactly. I don't think he's testing. I think he's self-doubting.
Yeah. Just because, like, he's mentioned several times in here, like he's from nowhere. He is no one. He's the bottom of the totem pole, per se. So for someone like him to be moving up in status almost, are you sure I'm the one you want? And And one thing, and that's what my God shot is, kind of rolls with this, but leaders come in all shapes and sizes, but it's just when God calls us to do our thing, we just need to trust in him and believe in him. But I still have self-confidence issues today, even with just doing this. Reading is not my forte, but I've started gaining confidence in it. So I'm hoping, like Gideon, I can not go too far, I guess, like he did, but start believing myself a little more, because this is what I think God is calling us to do. So, but, yeah.
That was my answer.
I think that, well, for the most part, that's mine too. And so, like, this is the same thing as testing God. It's yes or no, depending on the heart of the person. For Gideon, I agree. I mean, I don't think he was testing God, but, you've got some of those folks who, they just cross their arms and, well, prove it. If God was real, he would, strike me with a lightning bolt in this room and whatnot. And so, I think there's clear distinction. It's just, when you know the heart of the person, where either it's arrogance or lacking self-confidence, where, Gideon's like, I'm in, but me? Huh? Wait, what? Who? Moses is like, can you just send someone else, please?
What I was just thinking as well, was Moses kind of doing the same thing. So. But I think God picks some of these people because of the confidence, like they're doing it for him, not necessarily, if you have all the confidence in the world, you're doing it probably not for God at that point, you're doing it for yourself. So, and there's examples throughout, but I think more than often than not, he's picking someone who doesn't want to be in the limelight, doesn't want, all of these accolades. So. Yeah,
because we're going to see Elijah where, he doesn't have it. I don't think the story has a part where he's testing God, but he has the confidence in God where he's taunting, the pagans is like, where's your God? Maybe he's out. Maybe he's going to the bathroom, or maybe he's, got a DoorDash coming in or something.
Yeah.
Some modern day reference there, but to basically, to that effect where, again, it's the person's heart, whether it's, just positioned towards God or against God.
Yeah.
So, which will be coming up, and that's 1 Kings.
Yeah.
Let's see. I believe it's my turn.
Yep.
God reduces Gideon's army to increase God's glory. What aspects of God's character do we see displayed through his process of narrowing down the army in Judges 7, verses 2 to 10? Do you want me to read that? I can.
Yeah. Or, yeah.
Let's see. 2 to 10, chapter 7. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many troops with you for me to deliver Midian into their hands. Israel might claim for themselves the glory due to me, thinking our own hand has brought us to victory. Therefore announce to the men, let anyone who is timid and fearful turn back, as the bird flies from Mount Gilead. Thereupon 22,000 of the troops turned back, and 10,000 remained. There are still too many troops, the Lord said to Gideon. Take them down to the water, and I will sift them for you there. Anyone whom I tell you, this one is to go with you, that one shall go with you. And anyone to whom I tell you, this one is not to go with you, that one shall not go. So he took the troops down to the water. Then the Lord said to Gideon, set apart all those who lap up the water with their tongues like dogs, from those who get down on their knees to drink. Now those who lapped the water into their mouths by hand numbered 300. All the rest of the troops got down on their knees to drink. Then the Lord said to Gideon, I will deliver you, and I'll put Midian into your hands through the 300 lappers. Let the rest of the troops go home. So the lappers took the provisions and horns that the other men had with them, and he sent the rest of the men back to Israel to their homes, retaining only the 300 men. The Midianite camp was below him in the plain. That night the Lord said to him, come attack the camp, for I have delivered it into your hands. And if you are afraid to attack, first go down to the camp with your attendant Purah. Thus ends the reading of the word.
Yeah. I think God was more wanting it. If someone showed up with 22,000 men versus a camp, it would have been sheer force versus, numbers. Is everyone, like, no one would have, I don't want to say no one, but people outside would not have believed it. That it would have been God. 300 versus a camp, you're a lot, you're relying on God at that point versus you're just sheer numbers.
Yeah.
So I think it was God knew the limitations that man had. They're going to almost that we're going to take whatever advantage to take away from God versus if it's 300 versus 22,000. That's a
And God was truly with him.
yeah. So that's what I was trying to spit out, but I couldn't get it. So this quote right here was in my book. I've been reading the series, I should say, and every year when the new book comes out, I read all the other ones. And this was the main character's mom had dementia, doesn't recognize him. He's in the military, and it keeps talking about doesn't even know who he is when he walks in the door, comes out, and then she reads verbatim from memory, Gideon, telling people to get down on keep the ones that get down on one knee, and that you're one of the few that got down on one knee, so finish what you need to finish. So it's just kind of cool. God is putting what I'm learning here into my culture almost.
Yep.
That, but yeah, there's so many different meanings you can pull from that. Like, be one of the few that does the right thing to continue God's message, I guess. So when reading this and then, talking about Israel and stuff, it was really cool just to start connecting what I would consider pop culture to the Bible. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. Your Majesty?
I wrote that showing him that with God, he was truly capable. And that was God's whole point, was to show that strength.
The one thing I would add is God's love for those who are fearful and timid saved lives. Because if they were already afraid and timid, they probably would have frozen in battle and would have gotten killed.
Yeah.
So I agree with everything you guys said, but the one thing I'd add is just His love and His mercy that He said, God saved thousands of lives of the Israelites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's our favorite question of the week.
Yep.
God shot.
In the end, the God shot.
So, I went with day 90. Give you your abilities to get there.
Yeah.
But God chooses and appoints unlikely leaders. A left-handed man from a right-handed tribe, a Canaanite to lead the Israelites, a woman. God uses the unlikely not to pump up their self-esteem, but to give them bragging rights in front of the haters. That prideful at worst, fleeting at best, but reveals himself at work. He reveals his heart for the overlooked. It's not even that he sees potential in these unlikely leaders. It's because it's not potential, it's reality. He created it. So he gets the credit and praise. We love stories of underdog champions, unlikely leaders. They bring him glory, and they bring us joy because they point to him, and he is where the joy is. Yeah, like she said, it's every good story. We always want to cheer for the underdog. And sometimes we see ourselves as underdogs, so it's helpful to see God in that light and have him, or show God has the love and grace behind us to be able to push ourselves forward. So I really liked that one.
Mine was from day 91. Gideon doubts God a lot, and God never gets angry with him for it. God meets him in his questions. He's never impatient with Gideon's doubts and fears. He comes alongside him to embolden him, knowing that what Gideon needs to hear most isn't "you're awesome, you've got this, believe in yourself, you may be the least in your family, but it's just because they're jealous of you." No, Gideon needs to hear who God is. God doesn't counter Gideon's doubt by puffing him up with positive self-talk. He says, "I am with you, and he's with you, and he's where the joy is." And that one just really hit home to me, because I think how many times do we do that? We try to tell, even, in our kids or whatever, "You're great, that's awesome, good for you." But none of it's possible without God.
It's very true.
So
Mine was 87. It's probably the shortest one. God shows us so much of his character in accomplishing all this for the Israelites. Not just generosity and faithfulness, but strength, power, and persistent love, forgiveness, and grace and mercy. God ushered them into this promised land despite themselves. He has given them everything they need, but most important of all is himself, because he's where the joy is. Just in the last two lines, it stuck to me, despite themselves, and the most important of all that he's given them is himself.
Yeah.
A lot of things have happened, God has done in my life despite myself.
Yeah.
I think we all do it.
Yeah.
I know we do.
Oh, goodness. Well, thank you for joining us.
Yes.
Next week, we're getting into week 14. I almost said chapter 14, but it's week 14. And we are going to finish the book of Judges, and that's chapters 8 to 21. And then we're going to read Ruth 1 through 4. And then we're going to get in the first 3 chapters of 1 Samuel. So finishing Judges, book of Ruth, first 3 chapters of 1 Samuel. So
We're
all
getting there.
Yeah, we are. We're cruising. Well, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Tyler, Her Majesty, and I'm Pastor Josh. Thank you. We'll see you next week.
Just in my home.